Sunk cost bias is our tendency to stick with or invest further in a failing or inferior course of action, even when it is clear that it is a lost cause. Sunk costs are costs that cannot be recovered, like the investment of time and money that cannot be recovered. In order to change the course of events, we often find ourselves caught in a cycle of escalating commitment. We continue to sink more resources, such as money, time, and effort, into hopeless cause. We double down on a failing strategy despite the undesirable results we have already experienced. The sunk cost bias is also known as the escalation bias or escalation of commitment. A company may continue to invest in a project that has repeatedly missed milestones simply because of the initial financial and human resources committed. Sometimes people stay in unhealthy relationships because they have invested time and emotional energy and do not want to feel like it was all for nothing. Rationally, we know that sunk costs have no bearing on the current decision at hand. However, the sunk cost preys on our minds, leading us to make poor decisions. The saying, two wrongs do not make a right, reminds us that responding to a wrongdoing with another wrongdoing does not solve the problem. It's common for us to invest a lot of time and effort into a decision that turns out to be wrong. Admitting our mistake can be challenging, especially when others are watching. When we put our time and effort into something, we often feel the need to stick with it and keep pushing forward, even if we receive new information that tells us it may not be the best option. There are at least three psychological mechanisms at play. First, loss aversion. The brain is rewired to avoid losses more than it seeks to gain. The sting of loss is neurologically about twice as powerful as the joy and equivalent gain. Second, illusion of control. We often believe we can influence the outcome of uncontrollable events. Third, dichotomy bias. This is our tendency to see options as black and white rather than evaluating them on a continuum. For example, the choice is often framed as stick with it or give up, rather than considering a range of options that could include modifying the approach. During auction, a bidding war starts when two bidders offer more than they would otherwise be willing to pay. The competitive atmosphere and the emotional intensity of an auction can fuel the sunk cost bias. Bidders may forget that the value of the item being auctioned has not changed. Only their perception of its value has escalated. One countermeasure could be setting a predefined limits for oneself to avoid getting carried away. The sunk cost bias in military decisions can have tragic and widespread consequences. Once engaged in a military conflict, political leaders may find it difficult to withdraw without seeming to invalidate the sacrifices made, leading to prolonged involvement even when exit strategies should be considered. Prolonged military involvement influenced by sunk cost can lead to more casualties. Decision makers may rationalize the continued commitment as a way to honor those who have already sacrificed, which ironically may result in further loss of life. Moreover, extended military operations require sustained investment in terms of manpower, material, and financial resources. This diverts resources from other potential areas of need, both military and civilian. Long-term military engagement without clear objectives and exit strategies can foster an environment of uncertainty and instability. The invasion of Iraq and the subsequent power vacuum has been used as a recruitment tool for extremist groups. led to the rise of ISIS. Making decisions as a group often intensifies the sunk cost bias. Particularly, a group decision-making process is guided by leaders who have high implicit power motivation. The implicit power motivation is an unconscious desire to have an impact on others. Leaders with high implicit power motivation typically have a need to influence, control, impress other people, and achieve recognition or acclaim. They are also gratified by displaying power-oriented behavior, such as asserting social influence and dominance, taking forceful actions, aggressively controlling others' behavior, taking extreme risk, and an ostentatious display of valued personal characteristics. In making the decisions that led to the escalation of the Korean and Vietnam Wars, a striking pattern emerged. Leaders with a high implicit power motivation often took the reins in group discussion. Those decision makers did not just participate, but dominated the conversation and guided the outcomes. Unfortunately, this approach ended up steering the United States towards disastrous results in both military conflicts. Why do we often find it so hard to change course, even when we know a decision we've made is not serving us well? The answer lies in the human reluctance to admit fault, whether to ourselves or others. In our personal life, this may only dent our ego, but in the leadership role, the stakes are magnified. Admitting a mistake means facing criticisms from peers and the public. For example, if you dismiss an underperforming employee you initially hired, you're broadcasting your poor judgment. Many leaders find it psychologically easier to maintain the status quo even when it only makes a bad situation worse. But what about experts? You'd think they'd be immune to this mental trap, but you'd be wrong. Experts are often more susceptible to doubling down on their decisions, especially when confronted with evidence that contradicts their original stance. Why? Because their professional identity is on the line. To defend their choice, they may resort to using complex jargon and ultra-specific predictions. Why? They can use jargon and super-specific predictions to create a smokescreen so dense that people find it hard to question them. So the next time you see an expert getting defensive, don't be too shocked. They're only human after all. Why is the sunk cost bias so hard to shake off in organization? It turns out the reasons are far more intricate than just reluctance to admit a mistake. Decision makers who wisely write off sunk cost often face a paradoxical backlash. They are perceived as less competent and confident compared to those who stubbornly stick with a failing strategy. What's even more startling is that those pragmatic decision makers can also face tangible financial penalties. So, while it's in the best interest of the organization to move on from bad decisions, the people who have the courage to do so often pay a steep professional and financial price. This creates a powerful inertia that discourages course correction, even when everyone knows it's the smart thing to do. Our emotions play an important role in perpetuating the sunk cost bias. Feeling grateful or hopeful, you are more likely to fall into the sunk cost bias. Imagine a friend helped you make some key connections. Your sense of gratitude towards them may push you to continue down an unprotective path when they ask you to support a failing strategy against your better judgment. And let's talk about anger versus fear. If you are angry, you are more likely to underestimate the risk of your initial decisions, escalate your commitment, and become more committed to them. This is more likely to happen compared to when we're feeling fearful. This emotional dynamic is even stronger in tight-knit groups, amplifying the sunk cost bias across the board. Anticipated regret also plays a role. Nobody wants to live with the what ifs, and this aversion to future regret can make us cling to bad decisions. Essentially, our emotional landscape acts like a quicksand, pulling us deeper into prior choices and making it exceedingly tough to break free and start anew. Why do some organizations seem to have a remarkable ability to stick to a failed project far longer than logic would dictate? Sometimes it's the very culture of the organization that fans the flame of the sunk cost bias. Imagine a workplace where the repercussions for making a bad decision are so dire that leaders would rather keep failing projects on life support, clinging to the slim hope that they can magically turn things around. To cut through this knot, leaders need to accept an uncomfortable truth. Even well-thought-out decisions can lead to undesirable outcomes, especially in a world brimming with unpredictability. Forget judging decisions based on their results alone. What really matters is the quality of the decision-making process itself, rooted in the information available at the moment of making decisions. Acknowledging that not every promising venture will hit the mark can liberate teams to pull the plug on lost causes instead of spiraling further down a never-ending rabbit hole. George Washington once said, "I can bear to hear imputed or real errors. The man who wishes to stand well in the opinion of others must do this because he is thereby enabled to correct his faults or remove the prejudices." Washington's wisdom rings true today. Leaders who own their mistakes open the door for growth, both personally and organizationally. Leaders' sunk cost bias often creates a palpable tension between leaders and their team members. Employees find themselves wedged between a rock and a hard place, forced to carry on with the flawed projects they despise, all while grappling with the daily fallout. The irony, many of those who could speak truth to power hold their tongues, motivated by fear or backlash. So how do we break this cycle? It involves going beyond the simplistic yes-no binary that often constrains our decision-making. Introducing fresh, creative options into the mix can not only invigorate the discussion, but also provide a valuable escape route from the clutches of the sunk cost bias. Observing your decision-making process and those of others around you. See if you can spot instances of sunk cost bias. Please feel free to share your comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.